I just devoted these past few days to turning this patch of lawn into long-term food production. Quick backstory if you missed the video where I kind of talked about this a little bit, but we were supposed to have a lot of new space cleared and available from taking out some of these trees through the loggers that we had a contract with, but they left halfway through our project to go to another job. So I have to figure out how to fit the dozens and dozens of fruit trees and bushes that I ordered and are starting to show up into the space that we have cleared already. So I got all available area cleared out and fenced off, and I got to work putting all the trees into the ground. So the orders are kind of showing up at different times, and the first order I got was from Gurney's, and that was a couple plum trees and a couple mulberries, so I got those planted. And then I got a pawpaw from Edible Acres that I got into the ground, and then this order right now that I'm working on is from Fedco, which has 7 trees and a bunch of asparagus crowns and strawberries. So I got every tree planted from Fedco, and that was 3 peaches, 3 pears, and a golden russet apple tree. So there are 13 trees in this new area, and I got a 3-foot fence around them all, and I mulched all of them with some broken down wood chips that we've had sitting in the woods for a couple years now, so these things are good to go. So now that that's all done, I needed to figure out where I'm going to put these 25 asparagus crowns and 50 strawberries. For the strawberries, I'm going to start out in this hugelkultur bed that I made last year. I made this bed last year and I let it sit this whole time. I wanted the logs and leaves and grass clippings and everything buried underneath the soil to break down for a little bit. But I did put some perennials on top of it, like some chives, see what would happen. And it looks like a couple of those made it. So I transplanted out the chives into their own little rock raised beds around our greenhouses. So hopefully we can have a couple chive patches to eat off of for a few years. But once I got all those beds made and the rest of the hugel cleared off, I started planting the strawberries. I got about 25 planted on here, so I still have about half of them left to plant. I really like the idea of planting perennials on this hugelkultur bed because all the organic matter underneath the soil is going to be constantly breaking down, adding nutrients to the soil, and then with the perennial plants on top, I don't really have to worry about planting it every year, and hopefully it can just kind of take care of itself. It kind of makes it like an infinite food hack. Then I went into the woods and got a bunch of these rocks and then made a border around the whole bed. I didn't get it on video because it was snowing and raining, but I really like how it turned out, and it provides a permanent border and it just looks really cool too. So next up is my asparagus patch. So I picked out this back corner of our fenced off area behind our fruit trees, and I decided to make that a raised beds, and I was going to interplant asparagus and the rest of my strawberries. First thing I did was head into the woods and collect a huge amount of rocks to make a border. It's a huge area, so I needed a lot of rocks, and this took a pretty decent amount of time, but I'm glad I did it. This should work out really well and last a long time. After I got the rocks in place, I put some paper down, I started hauling in some soil and planting some crowns. We'll see if this works. I spread out the crowns on top of soil and then piled a lot of soil and compost on top of them instead of digging a hole. So hopefully a couple of these asparagus or strawberries can make it and kind of just take over this whole patch. I gave them plenty of room, but if they don't, worst case, now that I have this bed in place, I can just replant them next year and kind of do it a different way. So that's all done now. I got everything I've gotten in the mail so far into the ground, into its final resting place, hopefully. I still have a lot of fruit bushes that are going to be arriving shortly that I need to find space for, but I'll get all that figured out. This place is really starting to come together. It's hard to believe that this time last year this was just a bare lawn, and now it has a bunch of fruit trees, a garden, 2 greenhouses, chicken area, compost set up, and pretty much everything I need to be self-sustaining. But speaking of compost, I have these 2 big piles out in my yard, and I turned one of them. The other one is pretty much finished based on our thermometer readings at least, so I'm going to use that in the greenhouse in a little bit. But I got the one that I need to break down a little bit more turned, and that is well over 120 degrees now. And that should be breaking down and well on its way to being used in my orchard this year. The next thing I did was get our A-frame greenhouse planted. We are running out of space in our seed starting shelf, and a lot of our bigger plants are starting to shade out some of the younger ones. So I moved about 10 Roma tomatoes and pepper plants out into the greenhouse and got those planted. And I went over to more of our finished compost pile and grabbed a couple buckets full and got that spread on all of the beds. So these plants should be good to go. We are pushing it a little bit. We're about a month away from our last frost date, and there's still a couple cold nights ahead of us. And as I'm recording this, these plants made it through the first of the couple cold nights, and it got down to below freezing, but it stayed a little bit above freezing in the greenhouses, and the greenhouse actually kept the frost off the plants, so it looks like they made it. We'll see. Worst case, if they die, we have a bunch of other starts we can kind of move in behind them. But if this experiment does work and these plants do make it, it's good to know that we can get an extra month on tomatoes and peppers through these greenhouses on both sides of our growing season, hopefully. But it's so nice to finally be using these greenhouses and getting them planted with things that we love, like tomatoes and peppers. Last year, it was more about building them, and they were built so late that we could only get a couple carrot harvests and some spinach out of the A-frame and nothing out of the twin wall panel yet. And I just can't wait to see this place in full swing, and especially when these greenhouses are all going. In our twin wall panel greenhouse across from our A-frame, I moved some of the plant starts outside to, again, just clear some space on the shelf, and I needed to up-pot a tray of seeds. So I got all that done, and these things are doing well. They handled the frost no problem, and this greenhouse stayed a few degrees above freezing, so I don't think they had any issues with the cold. But this twin wall panel greenhouse is my next focus, my next project. I need to get the interior finished, all the raised beds built, fill the soil, and planted, because it's that time of year.